know they have discovered, the Africans pioneered in several surgical operations. Eye cataract surgery, unknown in the European and Arab world, was pioneered in Africa. Jenny in the city of Mali in the 13th century. The Arabs report on that. Do you know the Africans pioneered in brain surgery? They were cutting circular holes in the skull, relieving pressure from the brain with an 85% success. Plaques of bone grew back. Do you know the Africans invented the vaccine? They came upon the vaccine by puncturing holes in the skin for identification and beautification markings, and they came upon the vaccine so that in an epidemic, they would scratch the germ. They would take the germ from someone who is sick and put a little of it into all the people in the tribe so that they could develop an immunity to it. Do you know the Africans were using aspirin long before us? The Bantu were using Salix capensis, which yields salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Do you know they were using tetracycline, an antibiotic, 14 centuries ago? They found a yellow-green flash of tetracycline in bones in Nubia, and while it appeared in their grain bins, indicating they had come upon it perhaps initially as an accident, they were using it in conscious measured doses because where it was found, there was the lowest incidence of infectious disease in an ancient population. Do you know that they had done the most advanced cesarean sections? When Dr. Felking and his team, and by the way, before I leave tetracycline, 14 centuries ago among the Africans, you know when we began using tetracycline in this population? In the 1950s. The cesarean section was observed, the cesarean operation was observed by a team from Britain under Dr. Felkin. He noticed with amazement that Africans were using the cautery iron with tremendous skill, causing very minor tissue damage. They had a way of closing the wound, stopping bleeding, cutting the belly open without causing major tissue damage. Stitching, they even took pictures of the stitching, the collapse of the abdominal wall, the stitch. Do you know that not a single woman in Europe, in the operating theaters of Europe, survived the cesarean in the 1870s? Among the Africans, they noticed the woman came out hale and hearty in 4 days out of the hospital. They noticed the Africans were using antiseptics and anesthetics at a time when Lister had only introduced antiseptics in Europe 2 years earlier. They were doing this with routine skill, indicating they had performed that operation for a long time. Do you know the Africans were the first to pioneer in using drugs to treat hypertension and psychotic disorder? One of their drugs, Sertima, is used in the Western world. We don't know anything about this. When you study African medicine, you go to the witch doctor. That's exotic. People want that for their film. They want that for their little anthropological studies. And the reason why anthropologists get involved in it, I'm not saying it wasn't valuable. Some tribes were vanishing. It was good to get a record. But to seek to extrapolate from something so small, data that was to be considered as African data, to cover all of Africa and the African genius, this is one of the gravest pieces of misinformation, because a partial truth is worse than a lie. I must close now. And let me close because there is so much to say. Let me close by saying something about the Moors. The Moors introduced air conditioning into Europe for the first time. And their air conditioning had something even above ours. They were passing it over banks of perfumed flowers, so you not only got fresh air, but perfumed air. They were the first to pave the streets in Europe, the first to have raised sidewalks. You could walk for miles through certain cities where the Moors were in Spain by the flash of lamps. Something unknown, the lighted streets of Paris were to come hundreds of years later. I have a picture in that book, African Presence in Europe, of two black noblemen, Moorish noblemen, playing chess in 12th century Spain. Do you know of the impact on industry, the silk, the dates, the lemons, the ginger, the many things, the fruits brought into Spain? The works on animal husbandry and agriculture that was brought into Spain. The first people to lead lead pipes from the mountains and bring water into the houses, hot and cold water, were the Moors. And when we go back, they translated everything they could find into Arabic and brought it into the heartland of Europe. When we go back there, we begin to realize how it was that the Spanish and the Portuguese made the movement into Americas. How it was that out of a kind of dark age, European genius was to come alive and the Industrial Revolution was possible. We neglect our scientists here. Who knows that this light, which Edison pioneered in truth, Edison pioneered in electric light, we are not denying him his genius, but it was Louis Latimer, a black scientist, who invented the carbon filament that made light practical and universal. Edison could burn it for a day. Latimer could burn it for a year. Let us brood on these things, because there are so many. The shoe lasting machine, the first machine to mass produce shoes, a black. The first machine with a cup to lubricate itself, so critical to the mechanical industry, a black. The first refrigerator trucks transforming the food transport industry in this country, a black. The first to introduce telegraphy in the trains, a black. The first to transform the whaling industry in the world by the introduction of the toggle harpoon, a black. The first to transform cane juice into sugar crystals, to create sugar crystals in the world, which was to affect the economies of England and France, is a black. There were 1,000 inventions by black logged in 1913 alone. 1,000. At a time when in middle of the 18th century, Jeremiah Black, the Attorney General of the United States, ruled that slaves could not patent inventions because a patent was an agreement between the government and a citizen, and black slaves were not citizens. And in spite of all these disadvantages, the African genius, the black genius, emerged. Let us go with this. Let us be aware that we are not starting from scratch. Our forefathers, our ancestors are not just Chicken George. We have more significant roots in the civilizations of the world. In Asia, as Rashidi has shown us, in America, as my work has done, in Europe, as the works of Scobie and others have done, we are aware of the African influence throughout the world. We have to become aware of this in a real sense, all of us, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, because the history of man is the history of one family. We have been separated for centuries by myths and falsehoods, which makes us think of inferior races and superior races, inferior peoples and superior peoples. We can no longer think like that. We are on the threshold to a new age. We are on the threshold of a new consciousness. Let us walk out of the small cell and room created by Columbus, the 500-year-old room, into the larger and more liberating house of history. Thank you very much.